you ever had a moment where reality felt strangely out of order? You are sitting somewhere, maybe at school, maybe at work, maybe talking to someone. Then suddenly everything feels familiar. Not normal familiarity, not I have seen this before. Something stronger. The room, the conversation, the expressions on people's faces, even the feeling you are experiencing. For a few seconds you are convinced you have already lived that exact moment. Not something similar, that exact moment. Then it disappears, just as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind one question: what was that? Because almost everyone has experienced something like this. A conversation that felt strangely familiar. A place that seemed impossible to recognize. A moment that felt remembered before it happened. And what is strange is not that it happens. It is how real it feels. For a few seconds, you don't question it, you believe it. And maybe that is why these moments stay with us for years, because they challenge something we normally trust completely, our sense of certainty. The strange thing about this experience is how ordinary it usually begins. Nobody gets déjà vu during the biggest moment of their life. It usually happens during something completely normal: a teacher talking, a friend laughing, a family dinner, a drive home, a random afternoon. Then suddenly something shifts. You look around, and the moment feels familiar in a way that is difficult to explain. Maybe it happened in a classroom. A teacher was talking, someone dropped a pen, you looked up, and for a brief second, you felt like you had already lived those exact few seconds before. Maybe it happened while sitting in a restaurant. Someone across the room laughed. A waiter walked past. A song played in the background. And suddenly, the entire scene felt remembered. Not familiar, remembered. And what is fascinating is that people all over the world describe the feeling in almost the same way. Not that looked familiar, but I felt like I'd already lived it. That is a very different experience, because familiarity is normal. This feels impossible. And the impossible part turns out to be the biggest clue. Have you ever had déjà vu so strong that you actually stopped what you were doing? Not just noticed it, stopped? Maybe. Someone was talking, maybe you were walking somewhere, maybe you were sitting in class, and suddenly everything felt familiar. The room, the sounds, the conversation, even what seemed about to happen next. For a brief moment, it almost feels like you are remembering something. Then the feeling fades, and you are left wondering what just happened. What is fascinating is that people describe the experience almost identically, not as a guess, not as a possibility, as certainty. And maybe that is why these moments feel so powerful, not because they last long, because they briefly make us question reality. Maybe you have even looked around afterward to see if anyone else noticed it. Of course they did not. To everyone else, it was a completely ordinary moment, but inside your own head, something strange just happened, which raises an even bigger question. Why does something that is not true feel so convincing? Think about how often your brain predicts things. You hear the beginning of a song, you already know the next lyric. Someone starts a sentence. You know how it ends. You drive somewhere you have driven 100 times. Your brain already knows the route. Prediction is not unusual. It is happening constantly. The human brain is one of the most powerful pattern recognition systems ever created. It is always looking ahead, always searching for what is likely to happen next. Most of the time, you never notice it, because it works quietly. In the background, imagine trying to navigate life without prediction. Every conversation would feel new. Every road unfamiliar, every situation uncertain. The brain does not want that. So it constantly searches for patterns. And the longer you live, the more patterns it collects. Most of them stay invisible until something strange happens. And that leads to a possibility most people never consider. What if your brain recognized the moment before you consciously did? Here is something most people never think about. Your conscious mind is not the first thing experiencing reality. Your brain processes information incredibly fast. The lighting, the voices, the patterns, the environment, much of it is processed before you are fully aware of it. In other words, parts of your brain often arrive at the moment before your conscious awareness catches up. Think about that. The familiarity may arrive first. The explanation arrives later, and for a brief moment, your mind tries to explain a feeling that appeared before it understood where the feeling came from. Suddenly, something feels familiar, not because you have lived it before, because your brain recognized aspects of it before you consciously notice them, and when familiarity appears without explanation, it can feel like memory, even when it is not. Maybe that is why the feeling can seem so powerful. For a second, you almost feel like you know what is about to happen next. Then nothing unusual happens, the moment continues normally, and you are left wondering why the feeling was so convincing in the first place. But that still does not explain why only certain moments trigger it. Think about how often life quietly repeats itself. A restaurant reminds you of another restaurant. A conversation resembles one you have had before. A person's voice sounds familiar. A situation shares similarities with something you have experienced years ago. Most of these connections happen automatically. You don't consciously notice them. Your brain does, and sometimes those hidden similarities become strong enough to create a powerful feeling of familiarity. That is why déjà vu often appears in completely ordinary moments. Not because those moments are special, because they accidentally activate patterns you have seen before. The strange thing is that your conscious mind may not recognize the pattern, but your brain already has, and for a few seconds that hidden recognition leaks into awareness. The result? A moment that feels remembered, even though it is not. A moment that feels impossible to explain, even though something inside your brain already has. And maybe that is what makes these experiences so unforgettable. Maybe the most fascinating thing about déjà vu is not the feeling itself. It is what it tells us about the mind. Most people move through life believing they are fully aware of what is happening around them. But the truth is a huge amount happens behind the scenes. Your brain is constantly predicting, comparing, connecting, recognizing, processing without asking permission, without announcing it, without you noticing. Then once in a while something slips through, and for a brief moment you become aware of the hidden work your mind has been doing all along. That is what makes these moments so memorable. Not because they are supernatural, because they are revealing. They remind us that there is far more happening inside our minds than we ever consciously experience. Remember that moment from the beginning? The one that felt impossible? The one that seemed like it had already happened? Maybe your brain was not showing you the future. Maybe it was showing you something much stranger. How much of your experience is being built before you ever become aware of it? Maybe that is why people never completely forget these moments. Because for a few seconds the world feels unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. And experiences like that are rare. They remind us that even after spending our entire lives inside our own minds, there are still parts of them we don't fully understand. Maybe that is why these moments stay with us for years. Not because they predict the future, but because they briefly make reality feel uncertain, and experiences that make us question what we know are surprisingly hard to forget. Maybe that is what makes déjà vu so fascinating. Not that it tells us something about tomorrow, but that it reveals something about ourselves. And I can almost guarantee something happened while you watched this video. One specific moment came back to you, your own déjà vu story, the one you have never completely forgotten. So what was it? What is the strangest moment of déjà vu you've ever experienced? The one that felt so real, you genuinely questioned whether it had happened before. I genuinely love to read those stories because almost everyone has one, and that is what makes this experience so fascinating. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind human behavior, self-awareness, and the mysteries of the mind, stay here.